Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news.
So welcome back here to 775 Alive. I had to come back up here to Elko, but Crystal has remained down in Las Vegas, where she's joined by another special guest today, David Flippo, who's a candidate for Congressional District 4. Thank you for joining us, David.
Absolutely. Good to see you here.
Yep.
Yeah, we're down here in Clark County. A lot of people don't talk about it, but there's over 3,000 counties in the United States, and this is one of the most hotly contested counties, and you're running for a seat that covers a chunk of it, and we're desperately trying to win the Nevada legislature.
Oh, the state legislature is so critical, right?
Yeah.
It's critical to the governor. It's critical to the state, especially by 2030. So we have three more voting cycles to get that majority back into the Republicans' hands.
Yep. And you're a veteran, and you've gone to fight for this country and our freedoms, and now you're fighting for the Nevada legislature. So you're one of the guys.
Yeah, and to represent us at Congress. Well, she's brought up your military experience, David. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little background here, who you are?
Okay, I can do that. It depends on how far back you want to go, actually. So we recently...
First of all, did you play with Tonka trucks?
I had some Tonka trucks in my day.
Good. Okay.
But no, our family goes back to the Revolutionary War, actually. So we've traced it back, and we have relatives that fought in the Revolutionary War. There was actually 58 Flippos that died in the Civil War. So based on the death records and stuff like that. So we've been a family of service our entire family history. I was a military brat. I was raised in the military by my father, who retired as a colonel. And then I joined and continued that service. So I came in 1985. I got out in 2009. So if you think about what happened during that time between, the first Gulf War, 9/11, all the things that have happened, I spent most of my time in the desert. So in 2003, I was tasked to be a commander for logistics out of Kuwait and cross the border on day one to go into Iraq and capture air bases inside Iraq. So that we could operate closer to the battlefield. So it was something that we had done differently than in previous wars, and we actually fought from inside the country that we hadn't even captured yet. So that was kind of interesting. But I was in Baghdad when we captured Baghdad. So I saw a lot there. I spent a lot of tours. My wife and I headed it up, actually. Of my 24 years, I was gone for about 14 years of that before. So deployed almost exclusively into the desert between Qatar and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iraq and just all over the place there. So spent a lot of time in the desert. Retired as the maintenance commander in Alaska. I like that background with the snow.
Well, I lived in Alaska for 3 years, so what we get here in Elko is nothing like I saw up there when I was there. So I sympathize.
Absolutely. So when I retired as the maintenance commander up at Eielson Air Force Base in Fairbanks, Alaska, it was the same year that the oil spill happened in the Gulf of America, and that BP had, and they were getting in trouble for not doing maintenance. So they went to the aircraft maintenance field, which is what I was a part of, and they hired me to to create a preventive maintenance program for the North Slope oil fields in Alaska. So I ended up doing that for 10 years, commuting here in Nevada. So every 2 weeks I'd commute back and forth to Alaska, and doing that job up there on the oil fields. So, and then currently I am a small business owner. I own two small businesses. BP sold their assets up in Alaska, so we moved down here permanently to a home in Nevada. So, when you look at my background experience and the reason I'm running and why I'm running is everything that lined up. It's got to be the right time, the right place, the right situation when you decide to run for politics. And I've got the national security background. Border security is a big player in my platform. The energy industry and energy independence, and having an all-inclusive energy policy within the United States that gets us to where we need to go. And then the small business side, because the economy is so important, and the disastrous economy that Biden left us. We need to recover from that. And we need people in Congress that understand all three of those issues.
So what made you get into politics? So you had this great career, and I mean, what I'm always interested in what happens in someone's life where they go, I'm going to run for office now.
So it's always been in the back of my head. My bachelor's is in political science, and my master's is in public administration. Then I had my military service, and I believe in serving our country, and continuing that service is important to me. But I would, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I wouldn't have gotten involved if the three things, or the things that I have experience with that are going to impact this country, and that being national security and the importance of border security, because I think border security is a national security issue. The energy independence, my oil background, I understand the oil industry. I understand that now we're starting to see gas prices go down because who was elected about 8 months ago? Donald Trump. The oil industry is bought in futures. So when you're looking at that, well, 8 months, the gas that we're pumping now was bought about 9 months ago. So that's why we're starting to see, and it's just going to take time.
Yeah.
And meat prices are another issue, and obviously that is a rural issue too. But meat prices take longer than that 8 months because what the Biden administration did to the ranchers, the farmers, the rural communities, and cutting back on what they're doing with cattle, that takes a couple of years to recover from.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we're going to see a big change right now, at least for another year in the meat industry. So, but I have an understanding of all that. I'm a small business owner, and the economy is very important to me.
Yeah.
Well,
Scott.
go ahead, Crystal.
No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that's interesting to us coming here from the 775 down to Clark County is this Congressional District 4 is unique, right? Because it covers not only about a third of Clark County and Las Vegas, right, in population, but it also encompasses, 6 other counties, right? Lincoln, Esmeralda, Mineral, part of Churchill, and part of Lyon, too, right? So it's like some of the most remote rural areas of the state, and at the same time, our most urban area.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things that I didn't mention, Scott, because, the rural is such a big part of my district. When I lived up in Alaska, I owned 2,500 acres of gold claims up there. So I understand the mining industry as well, but just on top of all the other stuff. And when I was growing up and my dad retired, he bought a farm in Virginia. So I grew up waking up at 5 a.m, feeding the cows, getting, chickens, all that stuff, and then getting on to school, throwing hay bales up. Back in the day before the big round hay bales, right? So throwing hay bales up, all that kind of stuff. And I think that suits me well for the rules.
Yeah. Well, but what I wanted to get to with that is how do you find campaigning between these two diametrically sort of opposed positions? Is there different strategies involved? Is there different approaches? Does some stuff work in the urbans that don't work in the rurals and vice versa?
Well, the issues are a little bit different, between the rurals and the urban areas. So just a little bit different. And the struggles that the rurals have, and I hope your listeners are ready to hear this, but they kind of get disheartened, right? Because everything goes to Reno and everything goes to Vegas, and they don't get the love, right? The rurals don't get the love, and they feel like the forgotten ones. And so why do I need to go vote? We're all Republicans out here. What's the big deal? But what the rurals need to understand is that their turnout is why we have the governor right now. Yeah. And if we can increase another 5 or 10% in the rurals on the Republican side, and somehow get rid of this mindset that they don't care about us and why does it matter? We're a Republican county anyway. Well, it matters. It matters if you want to beat Stephen Horsford and get rid of some of these others that are in office right now. Mm-hmm. That's why it matters. And so that's my message when I go out to the rurals is we need to get the Republican vote out. And if it's just a 5 or 10% gain from the last time, that will be enough to pull us over the top. And then we can overcome some of this urban thing. And then we can have a representative in Congress that understands the military. As you know, Scott, I got Nellis, I got Creech, I got Knitter, I got the National Test and Training Range, I got Hawthorne up there. I got everything military except for Fallon. And so having somebody in Congress that understands the military, appreciates the military, understands the rural communities, understands business and the urban community, right? That's what we're going to need in there. We need representatives that will represent rural Nevada. And right now we haven't had that for 10 years.
And I really appreciate you giving us time and being on this episode. I personally traveled 9 hours to be here. Not specifically for you, although I would. I drive 9 hours for you. No, The reason we're down here is we are an activated voting class, and we go to war every election cycle, and there's only so many of us. And we're very concerned about Clark County, which is why I'm down here, and Scott's often down here too.
Right.
This is because we're trying to raise the alarm bells. Hey, the Nevada legislature is too close to a supermajority for our comfort.
Right.
So we're doing what we can because this is a great state, and we'd love for it to remain conservative.
And where it really helps is I'm running for a federal race, but the down ballot for me, as you know, this is not a presidential election. There's not a Senate on the race. So the top of the ticket will be the federal congressional race, and CD-4. I'll be at the top of the ticket. And then it'll be the governor, lieutenant governor, controller. We have to win the secretary of state and the attorney general.
Right.
If we want to change things, first we need to protect those three seats, the governor, lieutenant governor, and controller. But we need the secretary of state and the attorney general. And for some reason, that's where it stopped last time. And the Democrats took those. We won't fix our election process until we change the secretary of state.
Right.
Right. And we won't be able to go after this lawfare that's happening unless we get an attorney general. So those things the governor needs. And then we're going to slowly have to flip the legislature, right? The Senate and the Assembly.
Yeah.
We need to pick up seats, and we can't do it. We can't just wake up in 2030 because that's the redistricting year, right?
Mhm.
We can't just wake up in 2030 and go, oh, we need 10 seats. Well, it's not going to happen.
I'm glad you brought up the Secretary of State, because I tell a lot of Republicans that is where we really need to focus, because if you clean up those voter rolls, which the current Secretary of State refuses to do, that definitely gives you the edge in every district and helps you get that Nevada legislature majority.
Right.
So I'm glad you brought that up and that that's where the issue is.
Well, we have 3 voting cycles to be able to flip the Senate, the Assembly, and the Senate, right? So, and you can't just wake up and do it overnight. It needs to be a slow process that might take 3 or 4 seats this time, 3 or 4 seats next time, and we have to have a plan, a plan of attack to make that happen.
And particularly one that will get rid of some of the gerrymandering, right?
Exactly.
And it's interesting you bring up Horsford, because Horsford's been an interesting example, at least in my view.
Who's Horsford?
Oh, Stephen Horsford. He's the current incumbent representative for CD-4, right? Elected in when, 2012 or 2014? I can't remember.
Yeah, and there was a little break there.
Yeah, because he was voted out.
The general you'll be facing on the battlefield.
That's right.
Right. But the interesting thing about Horsford is he's really he is the only Democratic representative for a large part of rural areas, which is creating an interesting dimension. So we're seeing him here recently protesting outside the ICE facility down there in Pahrump and whatnot. But I know for my private business that places like Tonopah have seen him actually quite a bit working on their rural hospitals and some other issues. What's your view of, are the Democrats, do you think, successfully able to move into these rural environments? Because the impression up here is that they're not, but then again, we're so solidly Republican in the North, they don't often try.
I get out to the rurals quite a bit. I've been to Tonopah, Goldfield, Hawthorne, been to Beatty, Pioche. Nobody's seen Horsford. Okay, so
okay, that's interesting.
I'm asking them, when's the last time you've seen Horsford? I'm talking to the sheriffs. I'm talking to the deputy sheriffs. Those would be the people that would know if he was out there, right?
Right.
They're like, we haven't seen him. So, there might be some programs that he's trying to help with and try to get his foot in the door with the rurals, but from what I'm hearing is he's absent. Now, sometimes they'll see his staff out there, he'll send his staff out, pretend like, and then he'll post, Stephen Horsford went out to the rurals. Well, it was his staff, but okay, but, no, for your rural community and stuff like that, and if they're tracking Stephen Horsford at all, he is not representing Nevada, even the Democrats in Nevada. He is aligned with the far left. He's actually aligned with the Marxists, and I can say that. He actually went to Mamdani's fundraiser a few weeks ago before the election. And he's not even supporting the no tax on tips and the no tax on overtime and the no tax on Social Security. He's against all that, and he wants to raise everybody's taxes. And he voted to keep men in the girls' locker rooms, and it's just one thing after another. I think the worst thing for him is that he was one of the 58. So there's 435 congressmen. He was one of the 58 in Congress that could not condemn the Charlie Kirk assassination. Mm-hmm. That bill was to condemn the assassination, to condemn political violence. He couldn't even do that. And it was to honor Charlie Kirk's family and the first responders of that event. And he couldn't even do that. He voted against that, one of 58. That shows you where he's at and who he's getting directions from. When he gets on stage with AOC and Bernie Sanders here in Las Vegas, uh, that is where he's aligning. That's where he's hanging his hat, and that is not going to resonate with the Democrats of Nevada because he's not supporting lower taxes for them and no taxes for majority of my district in the urban area, the North Las Vegas and those areas. They're tip earners. They're blue collar.
Right.
They do overtime. So he's forgotten who he represents, and that's a fact.
And that's it's interesting because that's something that I have been trying to follow a bit, is trying to identify these areas where these urban and rural interests are intersecting, and in some ways, Horsford's district and his actions, again, this hospital in Tonopah that's been so problematic, right? And that seems to be a Democratic approach to the rurals, just pick this one issue and go with it, and ignore the other stuff. But one of the things we've been seeing here recently, driving down to Vegas here on the east side of the state, is both US 95 over on the west side, US 93 on the east side are developing into major north-south traffic corridors.
Sure.
Right, for semis. And you're in logistics. This isn't the supply chain for Ely. This is the supply chain for Las Vegas. And one of the issues we're having is there seems to be very little interest in Las Vegas, who tends to see this, well, it's just a rural road. We don't care about it. And they seem to be utterly disconnected. That's where their food's coming from. That's where their electronics. I mean, it's just astounding. How do you convince an urban audience that some of this rural infrastructure that we desperately need is actually benefiting them as well? And it can't just be about a new stadium for Vegas or a new exit ramp or what have you.
That's right. So, as you know, we have the I-11 coming through, right?
Right.
And I think that's a lot of what you're referring to there. And it's going to go. I mean, it's already there. It's coming up through Kingman to Boulder City right now. Then it's going to be going, from the Las Vegas area all the way up to Reno, I think, all the way up to, the interstate connecting up there. It's it's basically an international highway. It's going to go from Mexico all the way to Canada. So it's going to connect three countries, one interstate. And the logistics is very important. And, when we get into the small business discussion and why prices went up the way they did, I can tie it to two things. Two things was labor costs went up for the small business owner and the corporations. When labor costs go up, what are our choices? We can raise our prices or we can cut people. There's not a whole lot more you can do as a small business. Right. But then the gas prices went up at the same time. So you had labor costs and gas prices going up. And if you're a rural rancher, how many times out there do you plow your field and you fertilize your field and then you bring in the crops? That's a lot of fuel costs, right? So all those fuel costs have been up for the last 4 years because of Biden and his war on energy, war on oil. So obviously that affects the price of grains, the price of what you're growing out there, or the cattle, because of those logistic costs, the cost of gas. So when your labor costs go up and your gas costs go up, what do you expect? We're going to have huge inflation.
Yeah.
And so,
Scott, this will make you laugh. Yesterday I was at a doctor's appointment here in Las Vegas, and they asked me where I was from, and I told them the town, and I was like, it's about 3 hours north of Reno, and they were like, I didn't know there were towns north of Reno.
Yeah. No, we
exist. We do.
Right. Yeah, it's somewhat astounding sometimes. I ran into that when I was working with the census and talked about going up to the Duck Valley Reservation on the Idaho-Nevada border. And my colleagues in Vegas were shocked that you could go 90 miles north of Elko and still be within the state of Nevada. Right. So it's astounding. But it is, I think, an interesting question that I'm not sure certainly I don't have an answer to it, but that question, how do you convince an urban audience who in many ways thinks the rurals are dying, right? They're old people, they're not having kids. So in another 10, 15 years, they're not going to need schools. They're not going to need this other stuff. But some of the information coming out of the USDA's Rural America at a glance is starting to indicate, particularly since, COVID, that we're seeing sort of a re-immigration into the rurals. Right. Do you see that down where in your area in CD4?
Yeah. Well, a lot of this is the Democrat playbook, right? Mm-hmm. They want to pull people into the cities because they can control the cities, right? People that live out in the rurals don't want to be controlled. So, that's my spin on it. And that's one of the things I think you're seeing maybe a growth in the rurals rules is because people are tired of the city living and tired of the controls and all that kind of stuff. And it's very funny what you say, because the Democrats would prefer us all to come into the cities, and then they forget that, oh shoot, that's where our food comes from.
Nice.
I'm always so interested. They're so big on diversity, but they want everyone to be the same.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that you're spot on. The rural people, we like being out in the middle of nowhere and living in small communities. It's a different dynamic. It's a different way of thinking and living. And I think that's worth preserving. I'm pro diversity, but the diversity of culture, I really believe you have to maintain rural communities, because just in case everything goes wrong, the rurals know how to do everything.
I think part of what you're seeing right now is a lot of people are having that backup plan, let's say, because, we don't know if things are going to go bad here. And luckily, President Trump is in office right now, so I think we have a little relief on that. But
automating cities, what could go wrong, David?
There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk about having these cities that are, the 15-minute cities and all that kind of stuff, and bring everybody in. But they seem to forget, like, wait a minute, who's going to grow the food? Who's going to raise the cattle? Who's going to do all that work? And
well, the simplest things can take down that system. Look at the pandemic. If everyone's in a city and it's in lockdown, and we saw what happened in China, they had drones coming by that said, resist your human desire to want to be free. You're like, what is happening?
What's interesting, and I was on the crisis action team when I was in the military, and up in Alaska and stuff, and most cities, to include Las Vegas, if they get cut off from logistics, Alaska is one of those areas where there's basically one way, there's one road, and then there's the seaport, and then there's the air. That's how they get things in, right? Mm-hmm. One big earthquake destroys the airport, destroys the port, and destroys their one road into Alaska. And so there's a big issue with that, because a city can only survive for about 3 or 4 days before it runs out of food.
Yeah.
Without resupply. And Las Vegas is the same way. So, if you don't have continuous logistics coming in, continuous resupply, if there's a 3-day to 4-day delay in any logistics, you start seeing run on toilet paper. Remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Although that was an interesting example, because one of the things that was going on with that, which was funny, and a lot of people finally figured out, is the problem was you could easily get toilet paper if you were buying the commercial size boxes like they use for offices. And one of the things that happened with that is, they're labeled not for individual resale, right? And people are spending 8 hours a day at an office. So if they're not there at the office, that's where a third of the toilet paper they might consume in a day is located, and you couldn't transfer it over to this other supply chain, right? It's a fascinating example of how complicated this is.
Well,
so
logistics are fragile.
Logistics are very fragile.
Yeah.
If we can run out of things like toilet paper, food, water, all that kind of stuff is in the same boat, right? It's a crisis there. So logistics are very important, and that's why the Interstate 11 that you were talking about, Scott, that's so critical. Connecting Canada to the U.S. to Mexico, all that corridor is going to be critical. And it's actually going to enhance not just the urban area of my district in Las Vegas, but all the way up the corridor. You're going to see some growth, especially, and you probably want to get into the topic of BLM release. As we start the BLM release and do it smartly, right? And that's what's really critical, is that we do it wisely, and along that corridor, I think you're going to see more towns pop up. You're going to see, things happening within the distance between Las Vegas and Reno.
Mm-hmm. And we have this new industry, lithium. I'm very excited about the lithium industry, and obviously the price of gold is through the roof right now, and lithium is sunk. But in defensive rurals, you can't have mining industries without our communities, and it's a big deal. But of course, the big controversy with all the mining is the environmental stuff. So I was really excited to hear you have experienced environmental cleanup. And a lot of people have the wrong idea about what can possibly go wrong with these mines, how it can be fixed if it does go wrong. And I love that you have that experience. That's actually a very niche market.
Let's talk lithium for a minute. We have a huge resource there, but when you look at all the cars, the government, the Biden administration wanted to go everything electric. Is there enough lithium in the world to transfer all the cars into lithium batteries or whatever? The lithium is tough to mine. I mean, it takes a lot of water, and what don't we have here in Nevada? We don't have a lot of water.
So, that's great.
So that's a challenge for the lithium mining, right? But all the other mining that's going out throughout the state here in Nevada, it's all important, and it's so much that is in my district. I mean,
And your
as you know,
district covers 2 basins.
I go all the way up to Round Mountain,
Yeah.
Round Mountain Gold Mine up there. I go up to just south of Urington. I've got some, like Scott said, I have some in Lyon County, and then I go all the way over to the California border, over by Dyer and all that stuff. So it's a big district, and it has a lot. It's not just urban. Congressional District 1 and Congressional District 3, majority of that is all urban. It's all the south side of Las Vegas, right? Cut into two. And, but, I have that challenge. You're exactly right. I have a big chunk of urban, probably bigger than what Reno is for Congressman Amadei. And then he has a lot of rural, and then I have a lot of rural. So it's a big challenge in getting out there and listening to the issues. You touched on that a little bit earlier, Scott, but the issues I hear out in the rurals, healthcare, access to healthcare, the road system, the dangerous road. Well, some of that's going to get fixed with the I-11 coming through. But I've had conversations with the Lieutenant Governor and talking about, having these passing lanes are important. Like every 5 miles, have strategic passing lanes, because how many deaths, how many deaths do we see out there because you just get tired of sitting behind that truck for 20 miles and not being able to pass. So then they do a dangerous pass and something happens, right? So those are things that are being looked at. And, the I-11 is going to fix a lot of that, but it's not going to fix it on the 93. It's not going to fix it on a lot of the other rural roads out there. So we need to have strategic passing lanes that people know are out there.
And that's one of the things that's interested me, because I think you do have a problem with these urban environments. You don't understand how fragile the supply chains are. My thing right now is just watching over the last 2 or 3 years, 93 emerging as a major semi-truck route, right? It's not one truck you're worried about. The real problem is you have 5 or 6 that are, strung out along the road, and there's just no possibility to pass at a time. But I actually want to touch on another aspect of this, which might actually get back to something else you mentioned earlier on national security. I was actually up in Anchorage, and Anchorage is a nightmare town from an emergency planning perspective, because there's literally one road in and one road out.
That's right.
I mean, there's nothing else. Right? You can't run if there's an earthquake.
What could go wrong?
Right. Well, but one of the things that happened is, I remember when the Occupy movement back around 2010 or so started occupying ports in Portland and Seattle and shutting the ports down. It was really an interesting dimension. I'm teaching at the university up there. And, we had a couple weeks because of that shutdown. You couldn't get fresh lettuce. You couldn't get fresh tomatoes because they weren't coming out of the ports in Portland and Seattle. And I actually had among my students some of the members of the Occupy Anchorage movement who found themselves, these students that are 19, 20 years old, having to go on the radio because people were just so upset. And they're trying to say, no, we support Occupy, but not shutting down the ports because we're the ones that's going to suffer. My question is, what happens when infrastructure is threatened by various types of civil unrest? Right? Because this is something I think we're starting to see in some of the ICE riots, where it's not just they're protesting policies. These protests are sort of growing to the point that they might threaten sections of infrastructure, whether that be public safety infrastructure, whether that be road infrastructure, the growing anger of the roads being blocked off from protest. I mean, what's your sort of take on that dimension?
Absolutely. So, I can go back to my military experience too. What's one of the first things you take out from your enemy, right? You take out their logistics, right? You take out their logistics capability. And so whether it's these protesters or whoever, if they can figure out, it wouldn't take much to figure out, like, what are the key routes? What are the key roads? If we can shut that down for a week, maybe we'll get their attention. And this is why you need consequences, right? Mm-hmm. And this is why we need somebody like President Trump, who's not afraid to use his resources that he has available to him. And the courts are seeing that every day. He's got another court case coming in his favor, because you can't just shut down. You can't stand in the middle of the highway. That is interfering with international commerce, right? Interstate commerce. There's laws against that. Mm-hmm. So the problem is you have to have the courage to enforce that law. Yeah. And our previous administration didn't have that courage. Trump's not going to allow it, because as soon as you don't have consequences, and as soon as you don't take out the threat, and you can call it an enemy threat or you can call it a protest, it doesn't matter. when we go into combat, we take out the enemy's ability to do logistics, and that shuts them down. And that's what these protesters are trying to do. They want to, they can sit there and get in somebody's face all day long, but what really gets their attention is the logistics resupply. And if they can shut that down, if they can keep people from going to work, that gets them on the news, right? There has to be consequences. There has to be arrest made for interfering with interstate commerce.
Yeah, we're in a tough spot culturally because I think the American people are so well off. They've never really experienced the things that you've probably seen in war zones, like the idea of a food distribution turning into a violent thing. I mean, when people are hungry and they're panicked and they're scared, I don't think a lot of people have really interfaced with human beings in a mob at that primitive level. And it's unfortunate. We all want to believe the best in people, but when things get scarce, things get violent. And we're just, people are like, conservatives are so mean and draconian. I'm like, we are trying to keep you from sliding into the worst form of humanity.
We are fortunate and we are unfortunate at the same time. We're fortunate that we live in this country and that we haven't had these disasters. And if you look at almost every other country out there, they've been attacked, they've been taken over, they've become a new country, they've changed their names. I mean, can you imagine living in a world where one day the next is you don't know whether your country is going to exist anymore, right? So we're fortunate. Absolutely. So we're fortunate that we haven't had that, but we're unfortunate in that we haven't had that because when we get complacent and then we don't understand what real situations are.
Yeah.
Okay? So
and it's interesting, like just if you take food, for example, if you are starving, you don't have the mental energy to hate your fellow citizen. All you're thinking about is getting your next meal, and everyone's needs are met, and they're using their extra time to tear each other down. Yeah. And I'm like, things could be a lot worse. Yeah. They could.
Well, I use just like the fortunate and the unfortunate, almost for the same reason. I used to make humanity and humane and inhumane in the same way. There's one side that says it's inhumane to shut the border down. We got to let these people through. But then you got to ask yourself, is it really humane to accept the consequences of that journey and all those women getting raped along the way and all of the crimes and all the stuff that happens? How humane is that? Mm-hmm. So one side sees something as humane and the other side sees it as inhumane, and it's the same situation.
Yeah.
And it's just your perspective of it. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is quite interesting, but I want to be fair to our colleagues in the other part of your district, right?
Sure.
What are you hearing for urban issues down in CD-4? What are they talking about that's their big concern here for this upcoming election?
Yeah, so their biggest concerns are the economy, right? Okay. Bringing prices down. The problem is once prices goes up, it's really hard to bring them down again. So there's going to be a level of maintaining a current level right now, which is kind of what we're seeing. Prices go up and they don't necessarily come down again. But I think you're going to see it just like you did with eggs. Obviously, you're seeing it with gas because that's affected by the oil industry and the cost of oil. And we're going to see the meat prices come down. But I think meat prices are going to take another year to recover from the damage that Biden did to the meat industry. So, so we'll start seeing those things come down. But if at the same time labor costs go up and other things, then it might, there might be an issue there. One of the things that we had happen here in Nevada is in the last legislature session, the Democrats voted to increase the tax on gas, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not seeing the $2.50 gas that some states are having right now.
Right.
So I think
that was only for Clark County, though.
Right.
That was an extension of that Clark County gas tax, right? And, I don't think it was across the state.
Well, one county.
Yeah, well, I mean, and
give me a moment.
No. This is actually an important issue because for a couple reasons. One, at the basic level, it shows how much Vegas sways. We have the legislature basically trying to back up a county commission to raise the gas tax, and that was an issue that took days of discussion in the legislature, right? But I think it illustrates something else too that goes into this is, these singular explanations for stuff, right? That if it's the gas prices, if we just lower gas prices, everything will work. Or if we lower this inflation, or if we force higher minimum wages to drive up the wage level, it's going to solve all these other issues. But you always have this stuff there that's being complicated. right? By political decision making. I mean, how do you address that problem? Because we're dealing with this in the rurals. The 2023 legislature, for instance, tried to push the prevailing wage
Right.
on a lot of projects that would have basically made it impossible for rural counties to afford to do any type of public building structure. Right? We just couldn't afford the labor to do it. Right? I mean, firehouses, police stations.
That's right. So I think we were all in agreement that every state is a little bit different on their economy.
Right.
So so I'm not sure the federal government should be involved in the minimum wage. It maybe should be at the state level or even lower, right?
Okay.
Because it's based on your economy. So if let's just take Alabama. If you paid somebody in Alabama the same wage that somebody's getting in California, it would destroy Alabama's economy, right? But maybe you need that wage in California. So the federal minimum wage, if they're going to have one, it needs to be at the state with the lowest economic growth and need, right? But it can't be California's rate. But what you hear these cities, the people that are demanding higher wages, like from New York and Chicago and California. Well, talk to your state about that. It's not a federal issue, because if you make California minimum wage to apply in Iowa or Alabama, you're going to destroy economies, state economies overnight, right? I can't. I have a retail store. It's one of my businesses, and I can't even get a high school kid to come in for less than $17 an hour. And I'm like, okay, you're living at home. I can't separate. I can't say you're high school and you're married with kids. I'm not allowed to do that. But they won't even walk in the door unless you're going to give them $17 an hour. And you're just going, how? So I'm going to have to raise my prices, or I'm going to have to automate my, services, or going to go to AI, or I'm going to find another solution, which is what companies are doing right now.
Yeah. You can't, just from an economic standpoint, you really can't put those wrenches in those engines. It has to be driven by capitalism.
And I'm not even sure the state. That's right. And I'm not even sure the state should be setting that wage, because a rural community like Tonopah versus Las Vegas, well, that's a different wage, right? So it's got to be down to the low, because people choose to live in the rurals for whatever reason, the quality of life, the openness, and all those things, and they accept maybe a lower wage, or they accept that the cost of living is going to be different than in Las Vegas, right? But you can't say for the state of Nevada that a wage in Las Vegas should be the same as a wage in Pioche or Goldfield, right?
I would even say it doesn't work at all. It's just the places that have implemented, give them some time.
Yes.
It'll be repealed, because it's intractable. You've lost all the flex in your engineering of your economy.
Yeah. But, for the longest time, the Democrats have been fighting for this $15 an hour wage, right?
Yeah.
And overnight, we went from about $7 to $15 almost overnight. And what they did to do that, because they couldn't pass it in Congress, they used COVID as the catalyst, and they put unemployment. They put the unemployment rate at $600 a week. Well, anybody out there that has simple math skills knows that $600 a week is $15 an hour. So if you set unemployment at $15 an hour, you're not going to hire anybody,
right?
Unless you at least give them 15, because they're going to just stay unemployed, right?
And really, I don't know why they don't just call it price fixing. Setting a minimum wage.
And I think everybody listening right now, they know that actually happened. And when that happened, all of a sudden we had this wage inflation. And as a retail store owner, my labor costs doubled. Yeah. Almost overnight.
Yeah.
I have no other choice but to raise my prices on my product.
I'm outraged. Scott, are you?
Well, I'm outraged, although I'm I tend to be the big picture sort of guy. And the thing that gets me is I think, David, you're absolutely correct in this. And the fact that one of the things we're starting to see, and I would argue as a historian, this is something that's been developing since the early 20th century, is this increasing centralization of political decision-making, which is really hard to do when you have a constitutional structure that's set up based on federalism, where the states are these independent laboratories, as the common phrase goes, that are supposed to have the freedom to look at these different approaches.
So, Scott, go ahead.
No, that was my rant. Go ahead.
And you and I have had this conversation. I'm a small government guy, right? If you go back to the Constitution, the government is formed to protect people, to protect lands, properties, right? Transportation and treaties, right? Those four things are in the Constitution. Everything else outside of that belongs to the states, right? So whether it's education, or whether it's any of these other programs or social programs, or minimum wages or anything like that, if it doesn't impact protecting people, protecting lands, transportation, and treaties, which is what the federal government is supposed to focus on, is supposed to belong to the state. And we've gone so far. It's going to take 1,000 years to get us back to what the original Constitution mandated, but we've gone way out of bounds on what the federal government provides, which goes back to Trump's point, is if we got back to the basics of government, we wouldn't need the high taxes that we have. We could almost maybe eliminate the taxes and come up with other ways like tariffs, to fund the government. If it's not one of those four tenets, why aren't the states doing it? So.
Yeah, well, it's a big issue, and one you're definitely going to have to deal with here. So, any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
No, I mean, well, did we talk enough about the rurals? I want to, if we got to wrap up, tell me. But there's so many issues in the rurals that this BLM release. So I've talked to Ryan Zinke. Last time I was in D.C., I was at a SEALPAC meeting there, and I talked to Ryan Zinke about the BLM release. He actually took it out of the big beautiful bill, and you may know that. And I asked him about that. He said just
conversion of federal BLM lands to
the state. Absolutely.
Okay.
Good. So thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
But the release of the BLM land, and we can't. And he said the way it was written just wasn't right yet. He's not opposed to it, but he wants to really refine it and make it so that we do it wisely and that the states do it wisely. And as we release it, it doesn't. Again, that could be another program that just destroys an economy. With the states that have a big majority of BLM. Whether it's the ranchers or anybody out there, if you just released it all, it could be a big problem. So you have to do it wisely, and Congressman Zinke is in agreement that really at the lowest level possible, almost at the commissioner level, right? Not even at the state level. It needs, when we do these releases, it's got to be done in a smart way as to not disrupt the economy of that community.
I mean, and it was a first right to previous leaseholder type of deal.
Yeah. Well, and it was an interesting debate because, of course, we heard a lot about it up here. We're in Congressional District 2, and Mark Amodei originally put that language in as part of his, the Homeland Security budget was buried in this sort of, what a lot of people saw as sort of middle of the night stuff. It's just happened the meeting went late. But if I remember correctly,
anything in the daytime, Scott?
Yeah, well, but Stephen Horsford, Susie Lee, and Dina Titus, who are three Democratic representatives, all voted against including that very strongly, even though Clark County was slated to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the initial BLM releases.
Well, as you know, the cost of living here in Clark County and the Las Vegas area, we've run out of expansion land, right? So it's hard to expand. And so you're seeing these communities that, like Pahrump starting to grow and Mesquite starting to grow, and even Tonopah up there, because everything in between those is about BLM. So, so it does affect everything. Another thing I wanted to talk about on the rural side, on top of the healthcare that we kind of mentioned, is water, right? So, I ran for Congress last time. I came really close. And that's why I'm continuing to run now, because I made contacts and I made kind of agreements with certain congressmen, right? So my last race, I was in Colorado with Congressman Boebert and Don Jr. She was doing an event there. And the entire 3 days I was there, it was raining cats and dogs in Colorado. And she got up on stage and she was talking about the water issues they have in Colorado, right? And so I had to laugh. So I'm in the green room after the speech and talking with her and Don Jr. And I said, Lauren, what's your water issue? Because it hadn't stopped raining since I got here. And this is the idiocracy, right? She said, we have too much water. Okay. Now, anybody that knows anything, Denver actually pulls their water off the Colorado River, right?
How dare you say that to a Nevadan? How dare you?
But this is the problem with the 100-year law that we've still fall under, right? 101 years this year. And it was written with the percentages that each state gets. Well, there was 6 people that lived here 100 years ago, so our percentage is a little bit lower. But my point is that she has too much water. So I said, well, how's that a problem? And she goes, well, they won't let me build reservoirs. They being the environmentalists, right? And I said, Lauren, if we could build reservoirs, you guys could pull less water off the Colorado. And what would that do downstream? It's a no-brainer, right?
Right.
And she goes, exactly, Dave. And so I talked to Paul Gosar down in Arizona, who has also endorsed me, and Lauren has endorsed me too. And they want to work with me and create a Colorado River caucus at congressional level. Because what happens, what happens right now is each state is worried about their little percentage, right? And so all they're worried about is protecting their percentage, and they're not looking at the big picture of the Colorado, right? And so we need some at the federal level to look at this 101-year-old law and say, look, what kind of changes need to be made? We need to work with everybody. We need to get the smart people in the room. Let's get the universities involved. Let the engineers of all the universities along Colorado try to solve this water issue, right? What a great idea. It's 101 years in the making. But until you get people together, like Bobert, myself, and Gosar down in Arizona, who's going to make it happen? Right.
No, I'm so glad you brought it up. I have 2 water companies, and I have 1 patent for desalination, and I've been focused on restoring the Colorado River, and I've been working on it for 6 years, and I tell people all the time, this is not a resource issue, it's a political issue. And a lot of people think I'm a little crazy when I say that, but it is. It's a lack of will on the political side to make it work.
Right.
And it frustrates me so much, because it's like, everyone's like, oh, water issues. We don't have enough water. I'm like, we do, though.
How do we utilize it?
There's
ways to solve this problem.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
And so for all those reasons that we just talked about for the last half an hour, that's why I'm running. Right. I'm a common sense approach. I'm rational, and I just want to solve problems. That's what I did my entire career, was solve problems, whether they're maintenance or whether it's a combat situation or whatever. There's problems to be solved. And right now, nobody's sitting at the tables to solve them.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. This has been an awesome episode. Scott?
Yeah. And do you want to go ahead and give our audience, your website and social media stuff, and how they can get contact with you if they're wanting to learn more about this campaign?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So flippo4nevada.com, and that's Flippo, Flippo, the number 4, NV. So flippo4nevada.com. They can go on there. They can donate. Obviously, it's going to take about $3.5-4 million to beat Horsford. We already know that. So we're doing the numbers. We think we can overcome the vote. He's aligning with the far left. If you want to get rid of Stephen Horsford out of your district, you're out there in the rurals and you're tired of Stephen Horsford's 10 years of doing nothing, donate to my campaign, because that's how we're going to get rid of Horsford. And so flippo4nevada.com. There's also ways to volunteer. I've got a Tonopah rep. I've got a Lincoln County rep. Scott, I think I've been endorsed by Esmeralda. I've been endorsed by Churchill County. I've been endorsed by Nye County. I've been endorsed by Washoe County. So I've got the counties that are starting to line up, get behind my campaign. They hear my message. They hear like what we just talked about today. And these are all problems that need to be solved, and Horsford's not solving any of them. Right. So anything you can do, whether it's $10, $20, flippo4nevada.com. It's going to get us over the top, and the rurals are going to be the key to this election, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. We have to win Secretary of State. We have to win Attorney General, and we got to keep the governor, lieutenant governor, and the controller in office.
Yeah.
All right, I'm pumped up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for being with us, David. We'll get that up on our social media when we drop this. If you have a question for Crystal and I, or there's something we can do maybe to put you in more direct contact with David, you can reach out to us at info@775alive.com and drop us a line. Until then, I'm Scott Gavorski.
Crystal Newton.
And Dave Flippo.
Dave Flippo. And we'll see you around the 775.